I'm Robbin and this is The Breakdown. UFC 205, New York, Dynamite main event. UFC lightweight champion Eddie Alvarez, the Underground King, defends his belt for the very first time against the notorious Conor McGregor. McGregor looking to become the first man ever to hold two titles simultaneously. What shall we break down? The flim-flam? Been there, done that. Should we break down the mechanics of the Celtic Cross? We've done that. His pulverizing left hand, the best weapon in the game. Shall we examine technique, like the crisp boxing of Eddie Alvarez, or strategy and tactics, like how Eddie may look to use wrestling to nullify McGregor's offense? No, ma'am. When Eddie fights, it demands that we examine intangibles and the way fighters deploy them as weapons. Let's use this incredible fight to examine some big picture concepts. In 2014, inspired by Eddie, I created the Sapp-Alvarez scale to chart the connection between two loosely defined attributes. On the x-axis, we measure a fighter's risk-taking behavior in combat, from -10 risk-averse to +10 risk-taking. Risk-taking refers to the tendency to engage in behaviors that can cause physical harm or loss, but might present an opportunity for a rewarding outcome. On the y-axis, we measure the weights rating, which is an acronym for a fighter's willingness and ability to embrace suffering. Heart, grit, toughness, chin, call it what you will. But some fighters leverage their weights rating to create an environment for victory, and sometimes, some rare, beautiful moments in time, these artists draw on something preternatural to inspire us and win the day. The purpose of this imperfect study tool was to chart the connection between these two flexible attributes to see what the relationship could teach us about the combat arts. And we needed benchmarks to begin, so at the bottom, we put Bob Sapp, -10, -10. Sapp was a unique entertainer, enormous, compelling, but Bob absolutely refused to take any risk. And Bob was not interested in any type of damage or suffering whatsoever. Bob would get in there, give it a good go, and at the first sign of risk, get his ass out of Dodge. But do not judge Bob Sapp. He took punches and kicks from some of the most dangerous men on the planet and retired a millionaire with his health. And now, he has a scale named after him. So Sapp -10 risk averse, -10 weights. What about the other end? Vintage Eddie Alvarez, baby. In 2014, coming into the UFC, Eddie was the ultimate risk taker, a sensation seeker. He built his entire game around his ferocity and his toughness and his inhuman ability to out-suffer his opponents until he broke them. Vintage Eddie Alvarez was in a category of one. Would you make sure to tune into every one of his fights? Damn Skippy. So my friends, I give you the Sapp-Alvarez scale, a study tool intended to create conversation, learning, and a pivoted perspective from which to examine fighters and fights. With a deep dive, the Sapp-Alvarez scale can also share with us some truths about growth, evolution, and the actualization of one's potential. And for that, let's examine Demetrius Johnson. The date is April 24th, 2010. WEC 48, an undefeated DJ, faces Brad One Punch Pickett. In search of a Fight of the Night bonus, an over-aggressive Mighty Mouse chases action, gets taken down repeatedly because of it, and suffers his first career loss. That experience changed him forever, and the actions he took in evolving his skills show us that the Sapp-Alvarez scores are not fixed. Fighters with a growth mindset can change their approach, change their score, and DJ did that to become one of the best in the world. His evolved skills make his opponents predictable, minimizing risk. Inside bicep control here, he knows Henry will rotate the arm outside, flares his elbow, accesses the ribs, crushes with the knee. His knowledge and awareness of opponents' predictable actions reduces risk and weights dependency. Amazing. So now that we know these Sapp-Alvarez scores are malleable, liquid even, it's easier to understand the championship evolution of the scale's namesake, Eddie Alvarez. Eddie needed to change his approach if he was going to achieve his UFC championship destiny, and he did. After a loss in his debut, Eddie began leveraging his wrestling and conditioning to win fights, minimizing both risk and weights dependency. And against RDA, he used risk-minimizing boxing tactics to gain an upper hand. Then we saw the old Eddie 10-10 reappear. With the title within reach, Eddie went into full risk mode with full willingness to suffer, redlining himself and saving nothing for the swim back. Was this a case of Eddie reverting back to a primal default mode? Unknown. But we learned that the fighter's Sapp-Alvarez rating can not only change from fight to fight, but from moment to moment. Congrats, Eddie Alvarez. Now, let's use the scale to examine his opponent, the notorious Conor McGregor. McGregor entered the UFC with a very risk-intensive style that relied on a high weights rating. And through his first 8 UFC fights, he flaunted that 9-9 to become a superstar. McGregor's commitment to his penetrating power came with a double risk price tag. It made him stay in range for extra seconds, which caused him to get hit, and he tended to see challenges as walls that he could just smash through. And the Aldo fight was a microcosm of this. He risked getting hit because of his certainty that his precision and power would overcome. And then he met Mr. Diaz, a wall that could not be smashed through. Oh, he tried and tried and tried, but he was facing a truly unbreakable wall, and his will to keep trying to smash through created an inherent risk of deterioration, of system shutdown, and mental fatigue, leading to faulty choices, which would ultimately lead to defeat. But for self-actualizers like Conor McGregor, defeat will lead to growth. So for the rematch, McGregor and his coach John Kavanagh rebuilt his game around minimizing risk, but with the full awareness that Diaz would make a high weights rating mandatory. This challenge required a new, calmer mindset. Sure, there were some new tools and techniques, like those leg kicks, tactically correct, but risk minimization was at the heart of the change. Control use of energy, push and pull, hit and don't get hit, and it worked beautifully. Through 2 rounds, McGregor and his new SAP Alvarez rating were near perfect. But Nate Diaz, being uniquely gritty and visceral, would ultimately turn up the heat again. This is the scenario that cost McGregor in their first meeting. And that experience informed his preparation and the understanding that he may not get to choose what weights rating would be required to win this fight. Diaz might dictate that. So he came in with a mindset that embraced the suffering. It was supported by aerobic and anaerobic preparation to minimize the risk of fatigue and an improved self-awareness of his own use of energy. He could not prevent the Diaz storm. So he prepared for it, and after weathering the violent round 3 storm, McGregor returned to the game plan of risk management and the prioritization of technique. It would ultimately be the deciding round for victory. But those 5 minutes that followed would test his mettle and his weights rating one more time. That Diaz doubleheader changed McGregor forever. It forced him to grow in ways he could have never imagined. And he'll need every bit of that growth when he faces Eddie Alvarez, UFC 205 in New York. Will it be vintage Eddie? Will it be championship Eddie? Will it be the risk-taking Conor McGregor or the risk manager who solved the Diaz equation? Will they change from round to round, moment to moment? Whatever happens, we can continue to learn, study, and be inspired. And whatever happens, Eddie, this scale will always be named after you in honor of your body of work. Can Eddie Alvarez outthink, outwork, and outfight McGregor to retain the UFC lightweight belt? Or will Conor McGregor make history by becoming the first ever simultaneously 2-division UFC champion? Do not miss this fight. And enjoy the hostilities, my friends.